Thank you so much for joining us today. We are really happy to have you here joining us to learn more about the Cheakamus Community Forest. And sorry, this is my first time doing this and we're just getting used to everything on our side. I've got all these little windows opening up. So anyways, thank you. The Cheakamus Community Forest Board is here today along with Simon Murray, our forestry manager. And we will just move into the agenda. Other folks will be joining along the way, and we'll just bring them in as they arrive. So you see a quick agenda here with our board, Jeff Fisher, Simon Murray, our forestry manager, presenting information. And at this point, I will turn it over to Lucinda Phillips from the Leewat Nation to welcome us.
Hello, everyone. Those of you that don't know me, my name is Lucinda Phillips. I currently sit on Chief and Council. My portfolio is lands and resources, and I also sit on the Cheakamus Community Forest Board of Directors. I've been away for politics for now a couple of years, and but I was quite involved with putting together the Cheakamus Community Forest from the beginning. And now have been back on the board for maybe a year and a half. Anyway, on behalf of Squamish and Leetwat, considering that the Cheakamus is within the Whistler area, our territory, I'd like to welcome you all to our territory and welcome you to this meeting. I look forward to some healthy discussion and questions, and yeah, thanks for all joining us tonight. Cookstrom. Heather, you're on mute.
Sure. Darn it. Thanks, Lucinda. I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping items here before we start into the presentation. So this meeting is being recorded and will be shared publicly. Public participants will not be on camera, but if you choose to speak during the question and answer period, your voice will be recorded and your question will be included anonymously in a Q&A document that will be posted soon after the open house here on the cheakamuscommunityforest.com website and on whistler.ca/CCF. We will be taking questions this afternoon, either by typing them in or by raising your hand and asking to share them verbally. So by computer or a mobile device, you can type your question in using the Q&A function. There should be a box at the bottom of your screen, or click the raise hand icon. And when it's your turn to speak, I'm going to be the moderator. I'll be calling on you with your screen name and ask you to unmute your microphone. If you're calling in by telephone, please use the raise hand feature by dialing *9 on your keypad. And when it's your turn to speak, I will identify you by the last 3 digits on your phone number, and you can unmute yourself by using *6 on your keypad. We will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. So in the interest of being able to move through quite a bit of material in the time that we have, we ask you to hold your questions until the end. You can type them in, but we will be answering them at the end. After the meeting, if you think of another question, you can also contact us through the cheakamuscommunityforest.com webpage by the Contact Us page. And then we're going to be posting a summary and a follow-up survey questionnaire at whistler.ca/CCF and also on the cheakamuscommunityforest.com webpage. So at this point, I will turn it over to Jeff Fisher, the chair of the Cheakamus Community Forest Board of Directors.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Can somebody give me a thumbs up, Heather? Can you hear me? Good, okay. Welcome all. I see a few familiar names on there. Peter Ackhurst is one of the early sort of creators, worked with Lucinda and Heather long before I got involved in this to create the forest. I guess I'm going to try today to put our forest management of the community forest into a little bit of context, especially as related to the recent Old Forest Strategic Review that the government commissioned and has as a report now, which requires some action on government's part eventually. I believe Heather said there will be questions at the end. We will take questions for about an hour and a half, hopefully, give or take, if there's that much interest. If you're all asleep, then we get to go home early. So I will get Simon to move to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'll start with a bit of background, and there's people here who have more familiarity with this than I do. But basically, we have a vision that the Cheakamus Community Forest is among the best managed forests in British Columbia, and being very inclusive of community values and focusing on the sustainability of all forest resources. So if you go to our management plan, what you have to remember is that although physically the community forest is located generally around Whistler, we consider it to be part of 3 communities, and that's the Leewat Nation, the Squamish Nation, and the resort municipality of Whistler, because of course it is around Whistler, but it is in the heart of Leewat and Squamish Nation traditional territories as well. And when we say sustainability of all forest resources, easy to say, easy to spell, very difficult to achieve and make everybody happy, because there are many, many resources in the forest, one of which is timber, but recreation, tourism, water, wildlife, biodiversity, all those resources are out there. It's trying to find that balance when we manage our forest. Our mission is to manage the community forest collaboratively and sustainably for the benefit of all community users. Again, easy to say, one short sentence. Very challenging to deliver on in real life and make everybody happy. And usually you will not make everybody happy. Simon? So the foundation of our community forest management is ecosystem-based management. Not the same as the Great Bear Rainforest, but some similar principles. And we defined this ourselves in the early years of the community forest. It was always the intent of the community forest to be different in that we don't want to manage strictly for timber, which was what was going on in the area prior to the creation of the community forest. The forests were just part of the normal operating area of several different companies. So what is ecosystem-based management, or EBM as we call it? In simple terms, again, nothing is simple in this world, an adaptive management approach to managing human activities that seek to ensure the coexistence of healthy, fully functioning ecosystems and human communities. The intent is to maintain those spatial and temporal ecosystems such that component species and ecological processes can be sustained and human well-being supported and improved. Simon? Okay, so if you want to read, we have our ecosystem-based management plan is on the website, and it is also an appendix in the management plan, which is on the website as well. So the key concepts of ecosystem-based management is a focal point in the definition is the direct connection between ecological function and human well-being. We don't separate the humans from the forest. They're all in there together. EBM acknowledges the role of humans as an integral part of the ecosystem. Humans can change, impact positively or negatively the functions that are going on in the ecosystem. Alterations to ecosystems are accepted as necessary to produce the things that people value. However, human uses and alterations must be within the limits of what the ecosystem can produce and sustain without loss of biodiversity or function. So we can't take all the trees if it's going to make the ecosystem not function. We can't turn it all into ski hills and trails if that's going to impact the ecosystem. The main concept of EBM is to manage for associated organisms instead of individual species. So we try not to just focus on one plant, one bug, one bird, but a group or the ecosystem so they all can thrive and function. EBM places greater emphasis on what we leave behind before we can decide on what to harvest. Okay, Simon? So quite a few of the people in attendance, I believe, have been reviewing and have interest in the Old Forest Strategic Review. This is the report that came out in 2020 that the government commissioned to foresters, spent a better part of a year touring around, interviewing communities, interested people, industry, licensees like the Community Forest Group. And then they submitted a report to government last year with 14 key recommendations. And I'm not going to go over all the recommendations, but their main thing is more or better protection of old growth forest or old forest in the province of BC, with particular emphasis in the short term on some old forest types that are relatively rare, and basically there's less than 10% of the original stand left, and those are the ones that they've kind of recommended for short-term deferral while people work out how much to protect or how to partially manage some of it to keep the values that are in it. That's it's going to take a while. This is not something the government's going to implement, I don't think, instantly. And what I would like to do is draw some parallels, I guess, between how we've been managing the community forest and the 14 recommendations that are in the Old Forest Strategic Review. So Simon, I think we can, if you haven't seen the strategic review already, here's the website where you can find it, or if you can just Google it, you'll come up with it. Simon? Another thing government has come up with recently, which ties into Old Forest, which Old Forest and, or I'll call it old trees and big trees, not the same thing. We tend to mush them together when we talk about Old Forest or Old Forest attributes or old growth forest. But trees can have the attribute of being very large relative to their cohort or very old. And we tend in the community forest to look at both, whereas government has so far focused on old in the strategic review, and they've come up with a new special tree regulation last year, which is about protecting the largest examples of tree species left in the forests of BC. So they've come up with a table, you can look it up on the website, it's here, but basically for each species, they list a size, and if a tree is found over that size, it is now the law that it must be protected and established in a buffer that's approximately at least 1 hectare, with the tree roughly in the center of that buffer. This is focused again on large trees, not necessarily old trees, and we are trying to work on both. As you know, or many of you know, in the community forest, Bob Brett and his group has done a lot of work over the years, so we have a reasonable inventory of trees that are not necessarily the largest or large enough to be protected under the special tree regulation, but they are definitely old and therefore warrant some degree of protection. We have trees over 1,000 years old, relatively uncommon on the landscape nowadays. So I'm just going to go into, I got an example, I think next, Simon. So this tree is not in the community forest, but I didn't have a picture of a good one in the community forest. This one is in a different forest near Squamish that we work in. And I just wanted to show it as an example of how we have been managing the old tree strategic review, protection of old growth, and the special tree protecting big trees. This is a Douglas fir. It's in the Squamish River Valley. It's about 2.9 meters in diameter. And this is in a protected patch within a cut block that a company I used to work for protected about 15 years ago. Just to give you an idea of how long we've been doing this, the little kids in this picture are, with the exception of the youngest one, graduating from university this year. So this is about 15 years ago. And just trying to show that the protection of some of these attributes, big trees, old trees, special trees, whatever the term you want to use, has been going on for a few years. It's not necessarily new. What is new is the legal requirement. You must protect trees that are over a certain size. And the table is in the regulation if you want to look it up. Simon? So the community forest, how do we fit? One of the things I would like to sort of try and get across is that the Old Forest Strategic Review is talking about protecting more old growth, that we don't have enough of it protected on a provincial scale. They've identified a series of ecosystems which are particularly shy on protection and have said that those areas should be immediately sort of deferred while we work out protection plans or management plans for the remaining old growth in those ecosystems. None of those ecosystems are in the community forest. However, the community forest, when it was being created, the idea was always to manage it with much more protection than if it had been left as normal, I'll call it industrial forest, if you want to call it that. In the previous management regimes, the forest would have supported a harvest of about 41,000 cubic meters per year. And in the community forest from the beginning, the idea was to have higher levels of protection of old growth, higher levels of general protection for other reasons, cultural, recreation, tourism as well. And through a process that took quite a few years, we got an AAC determined that basically left half of the forest available for harvest and took the other half of what would have been the AAC under normal forest management. And we set out to begin protecting it, if you want to call it that. So when you look at this map of the protected areas within the community forest, I'll caution you, I'm colorblind. So when I start talking about colors, if it sounds like I'm wrong, I probably am. But in simple terms, the darkest green on the community forest, these are old growth management areas officially established and protected through government process and regulation. When the community forest was first coming into being, the target for government in this area was between 9 and 13% of each ecosystem to be protected. The community forest lobbied to have the government increase that to 19%, which was the maximum legal protection under the existing government regulations. So that dark green represents about 19% of the community forest, and it's distributed by ecosystem or biogeoclimatic zone. The next color of brightish lime green, if you want to call it that, we see on the map, it says EBM reserves. Those are areas that were set aside through a process the community forest management group went through with the community over a few years and identified a bunch of additional areas. They are not 100% old growth, but they are mostly old growth. Some of them have a bit of second growth because some of them have values for tourism or recreation or something, wetlands, maybe something that isn't technically an old growth, but most of them are old growth. We put aside those areas. That's a voluntary process within the community forest. It's not a requirement by government. And then the lightest green, which tends to be up towards the, I'll call it the forest that is transitioning towards alpine, and it's the largest area. It's not 100% forest. There is some alpine within it, but it is also off limits to harvesting, and it includes what we call wildlands, which are these upper elevation transitional forests into alpine. It also includes wildlife habitat areas set aside for mountain goats and grizzly bears. When you put them all together, you go to the table next, Simon, please. Next slide. If you look at this table, and without going into a lot of detail, there's three primary forest ecosystems that we operate in the community forest: the CWH DS1, the CWH MS1, and the MHMM2. The bottom two ecosystems on this chart, the MHMMP2 and the CMA, are primarily alpine transitional forests, so they are not typically subject to harvesting, and hence there's no requirement to protect them in the government's official OGMA plan. You'll see there's 0 in the OGMA because they're not typically in the harvested part of the forest. They are too, they're not good timber. They might have good wildlife attributes, they might have good water storage capability, but they're typically not good timber. But if you come across, I'll try and keep us on track here for time, to the, just come to the total column, Simon, if you could, or the percent, yeah, total protection. You will see CWH DS1, we are 35% protected. We're actually currently 100% in the short term because it's an ecosystem that there's only a small amount of it in the community forest. We've not done any harvesting in that ecosystem while we work out just how much of it should be protected. It is not rare on a provincial scale or regional scale. It doesn't exist everywhere, but it is uncommon in the community forest. So until we sort of sort out where we're going, we've had a deferral. We don't do any harvesting in that ecosystem, but the government program, we've officially protected about 34% of it. The next one down is the CWH MS1. We have our EBM plan has a target of about 40% protection for that ecosystem, and we're currently just over 30. The reason we didn't go to 40 right away is because it is a live process. As we identify new stands, new forests, new areas, we can add to it. So our first cut gets us at about 30%, but our intent is over time to get to 40% protected. And then if you look at the next one, mountain hemlock MM2, we're at 55%. Our target in the long term is 70. We are probably there, but there are some sub areas within the community forest that require participation by First Nations in a planning process, and we didn't want to pre-predict the outcome of the planning process. So there are many areas that are not going to get harvested, but we have not officially protected them yet. We're not harvesting them, but we haven't protected them, and we will complete these sub-planning processes with First Nations, which will bring that percentage up to about 70%. So the point of this is, in the Old Forest Strategic Review, they're talking about increasing old forest protection above the current limits that are in for the province. We are already well above the highest levels of the province. So you could say that we are effectively a little bit ahead of the province in this game. And I think is that, and then we go to the next slide. So typically now, so how do we do this? Those areas we talked about were all, I'll call it full protection of. Some of the stands are quite large, 1,000 hectares, some are several hundred hectares. We also protect individual old growth trees in our harvesting areas. We don't do clear cutting typically in the community forest. We have the ecosystem-based management plan and a silviculture strategy, which limit our block sizes and plan for retention levels. This is what we would call moderate retention. This is in the Callaghan. And if you look, you can see that several of the largest yellow cedar or cypress, depending what you wish to call them, trees, these ones are not the biggest in the forest and they're not the oldest, but they are the biggest and oldest in this particular stand, that this is typically what we try to retain and the stand level in our retention harvesting. So we've got landscape level patches, large patches, which account for 30% in one ecosystem, 55. In addition to that, at the actual harvest stand level, we have about another 10 to 15% protection of old growth, or can be second growth if we're harvesting in second growth trees, typically the bigger, older trees relative to the ones we're harvesting in that particular stand. Okay. Cut control. So some people in the province are worried that because government has not, I'll call it, implemented the strategic review recommendations yet, that there's people kind of trying to just log everything while they can before the government protects it. You can't really do that under the regulations, but just to give people some degree of comfort about harvest levels in the community forest. In the years 2014 to 2020, we have only harvested about 60% of our quota, or our AAC, which is 21,000 meters a year. We are on average 60%. So we're not harvesting our full quota. So we've already taken a forest that could produce 41,000 cubic meters per year of logs. We've reduced it to 21,000, and now we're only harvesting 60% of the 21. Some years we may harvest a little more. We are currently exploring options to shift some of our harvesting from old growth to more second growth, but it is intricately linked into our carbon offset program. So we're doing some research and some analysis to see if we can shift our harvest. Originally, we'd said we would harvest old growth to some degree for another 30 or 40 years. We're looking at if we can shorten that timeline significantly and move into second growth harvesting sooner, but we need to see what the impacts of that would be on the AAC and on the carbon offset program. So we've started that sort of analysis. I think with that, I turn it over to Simon.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. I'm, those of you who don't know me, I'm Simon Murray. I've been the forestry manager for a little over a year now, and I'm going to give you a quick overview here of our annual operating plan. And the following slide is going to show you the overview of the entire community forest. This can be viewed on our website, and obviously changes are made to these maps as we engineer the blocks and the planning is completed. And all the information that we have is available for the most part on our website. So if you, I welcome you to go there and have a look at that. And this here is our annual operating plan, showing just generally the areas that we're planning on harvesting or have harvested, and in the different planning areas we have down here in the Brew Creek and Brandywine, which we call Fee, Powder over here, which is in the Callaghan Valley, and the Cheakamus River here. And then to the north of Whistler, we've got the Rainbow, Wedge, and the Show area. So this is the overview map that just gives you an idea of what we're working on for harvesting in the next, I would think, 3-year time frame here, rather than trying to do all of this year. We really don't know what we're going to be up to this year at this stage. So my next slide here will take you to a block in the Brandywine Creek called Fee 01, and I've circled it here in red. And it's a 4.6 hectare opening with planned low retention. It's currently deferred due to the high development costs, and it's an old growth forest type, and a special attention will be given to retaining large diameter trees. The next one, just over further up the hillside here, is a Fee 02, and it's consists of 6 to 8 small openings of 1.5 to 5 hectares in size with moderate and low retention levels. This is an old growth forest type. And the retention strategy will focus on retaining large diameter trees and trees with wildlife tree attributes. Logging will need to be using cable yarding techniques due to the steep terrain, and the upgrades of old existing road will provide improvements to the metal dome main line used by tourists to access the backcountry. This map doesn't show the road going all the way up into the Alpine, but if you follow my cursor, it goes up in here and then all the way up into the Brandywine meadows there. And here we are in the Callaghan Creek area. This is development Powder 07, and it's been was engineered years ago. It was re-engineered into a series of 6 openings with low and moderate retention levels located in groups and as individual trees. This is an old growth forest type, and the tree retention will focus on old, large diameter trees. And the recent upgrades to the Doherty main line, which is this road here that comes in from the south by the mining tenure holder, makes access from the south much more logical option right now for us. However, the commercial recreation tenure holder has indicated a desire to obtain a higher elevation north aspect loop trail option for their winter tour operations, which would be this road here, which is not built. So we aren't quite sure exactly what's going to occur there. So it's still in the planning stages. Here we go into the Basalt Valley. This particular area is off of the James Lake Road. It is this area here that's circled in red. These yellow areas were harvested about 5 years ago, and this is it's a second growth timber with low to moderate retention. It's in the fuel modification area, but is not currently a priority area for the strategic landscape level fuel breaks that we've been working on in the valley. So it does tie in, however, with the linear fuel breaks that have been created by the BC Hydro right of way. And the next slide here is up in the Basalt Valley, which is in and behind the Cheakamus Crossing neighborhood. And this is a series of small 1/2 to 3 hectare openings in both second growth and old growth forest types with low and moderate retention. This development will need to incorporate visual design so it meets or exceeds the visual quality objectives of partial retention as viewed from the peak of Whistler Mountain. This hillside is visible from Whistler Mountain, so we will be focusing quite heavily on making sure that it meets the requirements of partial retention, which is the block needs to be, can be visible, but needs to be in small in scale and generally not terribly visible to unless you're really looking hard. So I'll talk about this a little bit later with the road development that we are looking at developing in here in the Basalt Valley. And I'll go down to the next one here down in Brew Creek. Now, Brew Creek is in the southern portion of the community forest. And this is a new planting area that will develop mature second growth timber in several small openings with low and moderate retention levels. Engineering of the harvest boundary and access roads will commence in the spring. And this is located in the Brew Creek community watershed, which requires additional buffers around the riparian features. And you can see here on the map, we've got a number of openings that are proposed. They haven't been confirmed that this is exactly where they're going to be, but generally this is the location that we've identified. And the next slide is we're going to the northern portion of the community forest here up in the 16 Mile Creek Valley. And these planting areas have been identified years ago, and they're just broad shapes. We haven't done any made any decisions about where the exact openings will be, but there will be a number of small openings with variable levels of retention, and it's typically higher elevation second growth and old growth stands, and the engineering is expected to start this year. And it also will provide a much needed opportunity to improve the public road access to the Ancient Cedars recreation trails. And this development might be done in conjunction with the proposed fuel break in the 16 Mile Creek Valley here that I'll get to in a minute. And the final slide I'd like to show you for our retention harvesting is in the Wedgemount Creek area. And this yellow shape is not the extent of the cutting boundary, but this is just the general planning outline of where we will be looking at putting in small openings. And this is a second growth plantation Douglas fir, and it's going to be small openings with a combination of moderate retention and hopefully some fuel reduction strategies that we can incorporate into it. The engineering will commence this spring, and the design of this development will need to incorporate numerous high-use mountain biking trails, which you can see are these yellow lines here, which will need to be incorporated into the design of these openings. And also this area, all the Wedgemount and Wedge Creek areas are in a managed future habitat area for the northern spotted owl, which requires 40 of the largest 80 trees to be retained per hectare. So that is also a consideration for the design of these of this development. Now, I just want to switch over to our efforts we've been doing in the wildfire hazard reduction treatments in the community forest, and since 2014 in the community forest, we've treated approximately 190 hectares in the Callaghan Creek area, 21 Mile Creek, which is in the Alpine Meadows area, Wedge Creek, we've done some there, and then more recently in the last 3 years, we've done a large landscape level fuel break in the Cheakamus River along the Cheakamus River Road. And that is, here's another slide that just gives you a little overview of what we've done. Now, the projects that were completed on the Callaghan Forest Service Road is this pink strip, this fuel break here that was approximately 45 hectares. The project that's underway at the moment is this orange fuel break, and that's in the Cheakamus Lake Road area, and that is scheduled to be completed in the spring of this year. And the other fuel break, which we are really hoping to get going, at least with planning stages, is this green strip here in the 16 Mile Valley, and we will certainly be looking at doing a prescription this year, and it would be a multi-year project because it's quite a large area here. It's probably about 120 hectares. Here is just a sort of a little definition and a quick diagram of what we're trying to achieve with a primary fuel break. And a primary fuel break is a distinct area outside a community or other values at risk of strategic size, shape, and placement, where modifications of forest fuels aid in the protection of the community and the resources in the event of a wildfire. The objective is designed to modify fire behavior by breaking the crown fire threshold and reducing fire intensity, facilitate improved fire suppression techniques. So in a nutshell, that's what we're trying to achieve. And that's ongoing, and I think we really like to carry on with our fuel management treatments going forward. But the challenge really is funding and just operational logistics. It can be very difficult and very expensive to do these treatments. I'll just give you a little update on this. Is the Cheakamus River fuel break here with a better, more detailed map. The orange portion has been completed over the last 2 years. This yellow portion is going to be completed this spring. And that is the C02 phase, 15.3 hectares. And we've managed to recover 2,500 cubic meters of merchantable timber, and a good majority of the debris was sent to the municipality solid waste composter. So we didn't have to burn the waste, and we didn't have to necessarily throw it away. It's being used for the composter. And this fuel break has been successful at achieving the fuel reduction targets, generating log revenues, and providing local employment. And again, thanks to the Forest Enhancement Society of BC and the RMOW for the generous funding to make this project a success. This just is a rather crude map of the 16 Mile Creek proposal to the north of Whistler. And this is a planned landscape level linear fuel break that has been identified as a key strategic component of the ongoing Whistler Community Wildfire Protection Plan. The Whistler Valley does not currently have a landscape level fuel break to protect it from a wildfire from the north. And this would be the best option for us. And the completion of this fuel break would be a multi-year project requiring outside funding from the province, municipalities, community forest associations, and wherever we think we can find funding. So it's, as I say, that's the biggest challenge. But the municipality has committed to funding a fuel management prescription to be conducted in 2020 by BA Blackwell and Associates. And I just want to showcase this proposal we have just in the interface of the Rainbow Subdivision and Emerald Estates. This map shows these brown shaded areas are the proposed treatment areas. This is Highway 99 wrapping around Green Lake here, and this is the newer subdivision of Rainbow here. So you can see that this is right up against a residential neighborhood, and this was identified as a fairly high priority area for fuel reduction. However, we just haven't gotten the funding, and there is there's a few hurdles that we need to overcome before this can happen, and also the method of treatment is still yet undetermined in terms of how we're actually going to do this treatment on the ground, which can be difficult, especially in the steeper ground, where you may have to have manual cutting going on, and it can get extremely expensive. I'll go down to the next slide here and just give you a little snapshot here of our proposal to reconnect a road into the Basalt Valley. And the rationale behind this is to create a dedicated industrial access route into the Basalt Valley to accommodate the Cheakamus Crossing Phase 2 housing development, which is currently ongoing. And the Cheakamus Phase 2 development is basically going to render the existing logging road unusable for industrial purposes, because it just is not really appropriate for us to be driving industrial equipment through residential neighborhoods anymore. So we recognize the need for a new road to access into the Basalt Valley. And this road will commence from the Whistler Aggregates Quarry, and a total of 535 meters of new road is needed to connect with the existing roads in this valley, and the total route length is 2.165 kilometers. So I've got another slide here that shows you the overview of the area. So this is the existing logging road right here that is in the Whistler Interpretive Forest, which is currently open for the public. But the new Cheakamus Crossing Phase 2 development is this parcel of land right here where I'm circling my cursor. And this is going to be developed into a new neighborhood. So we will not really be able to use this road for industrial purposes. You know, it's a proposal that this could be not blocked off for, you know, as a non-motorized segment of road. And so our proposal is to connect this road, which is this green line, to this green line right here. And this purple section is the new section of road that would need to be constructed to connect into the valley and develop the forests in there. So that's just a nutshell, in a nutshell, what we're planning on doing, or we would like to do. But yeah, I mean, it's still a ways off, and we're not entirely sure about the funding to do this sort of project. So we're hopeful it'll eventually happen. That's all I've got for now, and I thank you very much for listening in. And I think we're pretty much right on schedule here for the next portion of our meeting, and that would be the questions and answers. And yeah, so I'll just stop that, and here we are.
Great. Thank you so much, Simon and Jeff. We have received a few questions already, so I'll just start at the top. Someone has asked, why are we even talking about cutting any old growth forest areas around here? They are priceless and should not be touched. We can do better. Who would like to speak to how the Cheakamus Community Forest could potentially do better?
I guess, are you looking at me, Heather?
Sure, Jeff volunteer, and then maybe Lucinda has some follow-up comments.
Okay, yes, old growth forests have many, many values. Our challenge is to find that balance between how much we harvest and how much we protect. There is still lots of old growth of the type we harvest in the province and in the community forest. As I tried to show in my slide, we have between 30 and 55% of our old growth forests currently protected within the community forest. The challenge was, when the community forest was created, the idea was to reduce the logging, do a better job, go to an ecosystem-based management, balance out or give more weight to tourism, recreation, biodiversity, but still to harvest some timber. And currently, we still harvest some of our timber from old growth, some from second growth. We are on a program to shift out of the old growth, but it's a question of, is it going to take 30 years, 20 years, 10 years, or 5 years? And we are still examining options to change our harvest planning that way. But currently, we are still harvesting some old growth. And I think, did Lucinda want to also contribute?
Nope. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. A second question. Why are you fire treating mid to upper slope? What is the risk you are preventing? Simon?
Yeah, so I can answer that. Well, we aren't generally treating and haven't treated mid to high elevation stands in the community forest. All of our fuel treatments to date have been valley bottom and right along rivers and along, obviously, the mainline logging road. So we aren't doing any mid to high elevation fuel treatments, to my knowledge.
Heather, if I could chime in, I guess the other thing is, we ourselves are pretty good at doing the fuel treatments, but we actually rely on other provincially, actually nationally recognized experts, such as BA Blackwell, to assess where we should be doing the treatments. And we're trying to build this framework of fuel management zones, if you want to call them, where they're supposed to serve a couple of purposes. One is along the main road to Cheakamus or up to Callaghan, if somebody is to start a campfire, throw a cigarette out, whatever, that by reducing the fuels immediately adjacent to the road, a fire may start, but it doesn't have enough fuel to build energy. And in theory, the wildland fire people or Whistler Fire Department could get there and put it out before it becomes a big issue. The other is building these landscape level areas where if there is a larger fire moving across the landscape, these are the places where the wildfire crews believe they could set up a defense and stop or control a larger scale fire. Because there's less fuel, the crowns of the forest don't connect anymore, so a crown fire will hopefully drop down onto the ground. And on the ground, there's not much fuel, so the fire loses its intensity, I'll call it, its energy, and the crews are able to control it. Now, these are all based on the science of wildfire, and like I say, we are not the experts on that. We are becoming experts on implementing them, but we do not do the prescriptions ourselves.
Thanks, Jeff. A related question is, as conditions get drier, what protocols will be put in place to prevent human-caused ignitions?
I guess I'll try that one again. Typically, we have the Wildfire Act and the wildfire regulations in British Columbia, which control when, you see the classic signs, low, medium, high, extreme fire hazard. When conditions get to high or extreme, there's typically campfire bans put in. In very rare cases, the forest actually gets closed. Typically, that only happens if there are so many fires already going in the province that the province feels it does not have the resources to fight a new fire. They will actually close the forest, but that's only happened about once in the last 10 years where we actually put gates or people and just said, sorry, can't go to the forest for a while. Whistler, the RMOW Whistler, which overlaps about 2/3 of the community forest, their fire department will also implement restrictions on recreational activities, campfires, those kinds of things, open burning, as they feel that the hazard is high enough to produce risk to Whistler. Fair enough?
Jeff, if I may as well, along with that, the RMOW has purchased appropriate equipment for kind of a rapid attack from the valley, lighter trucks, and they've also done a lot of additional training with our crews. So that's been done in the last few years as well.
A good point, John. That's true, because a lot of these roads are not really suitable for your large civil type fire trucks.
The next question could be for one of the two Whistler councillors. There are a number of comments on here about the desire to not harvest old growth. One of our questioners has said there needs to be no old growth forest disturbed until it's decided that adequate areas have been identified and protected. John or Arthur, can this be incorporated into our community plan?
I'll go first, and Arthur, you can comment as well. There's no doubt it's with the report last year and some of the work that AWARE has been doing there, and FWAC, there's a lot of conversations going on in our community about the old growth. I think it's important that we sit down with our partners and see if, as Jeff just mentioned, is it 5 years? Is it 2 years? Is it 10 years? But I think it's a continual conversation. It's a goal of our community, but I think we have to be respectful of our two partners. It's a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 agreement, and that conversation is taking place. The other is that we're sort of in an area now where our second growth is not ready yet, and so there's a gap. Different opinions, but somewhere between 10, 20, 30 years before our second growth is ready for the market. So how do we manage and protect our community forest and keep it within some of the parameters has been laid down while this takes place, while the second growth becomes more market ready. And also with that, a lot of the second growth is kind of closer into our community and more visible. So lots of conversations, and of course that's why we're having this open house and hearing from the community as well. Arthur?
I'm pretty much just echoing my fellow councillors' comments. First and foremost, our First Nations are our key, primary, highly respected partners, and whatever we do, it needs to be in concert with them. I think Jeff's comment about, and very well presented, easily stated, complex to deliver. Of course, I would like to see the shortest time possible to get to not having to log old growth. The community has been very clear to me on that with my environmental file and passion on that. But it's complex. I mean, back to Jeff's comments, if I could add a bit, we have logged and will in the future log some old growth for recreation. We wouldn't have ski trails if we didn't do that. But having a clear definition of what we consider as old growth and not too, it certainly helps when I look at the higher elevation old growth. And then as a climate researcher, my biggest concern is that we don't burn this place down. Our summer temperatures are increasing at 4 times the rate of winter, over 2 degrees Celsius in the last 40 years. Our forests are changing, and how do we adapt quick enough to keep the risk down that we don't lose a significant part of our community? So it's complex. Again, I'll conclude by stating I hear the community very clearly on the old growth issue. But there's a lot that we need to work through to get there. And I'm glad we're having this discussion today, and I encourage more comment and perspective on this. Thank you.
We had some questions submitted by email earlier, so I'm going to ask one of those questions. So if the logging is providing jobs, let's provide them, but in a different way. How many of the direct jobs go to each partner, the RMLW, Squamish Nation, Lil'wat Nation, and who is getting the local employment and benefit? And perhaps maybe Simon, you could speak to that, and Lucinda could follow up with some comments on what it means to her community.
Right. So in the community forest, we're committed to employing First Nations primarily as our preferred contractor, prime contractors, and that would be both of the 2 First Nations partners, and that is something that has been we've been doing that since the community forest was conceived. So that is one of the main purposes of the community forest, is to provide employment for the local forestry contractors, particularly the First Nation contractors. Lucinda, I don't know whether you have got anything to add to that.
Other than, I know Leetwat, we have our own forestry company. It's called Leetwat Forestry Ventures. We have been doing a lot of work within our territory, and for years, I think being contracted through the Cheakamus Community Forest. It's been, I think, a great relationship that we have with the Cheakamus. We really do appreciate the training that it has provided, the jobs it has provided, and the amount of qualified members we have within our community now, not only based on the Cheakamus Community Forest, but also, having our own forestry ventures. I also wanted to respond to John Wood. He had asked and wanted to hear from the First Nations rep. Considering I'm the only one on the committee right now, I'm assuming he's talking to me. When it does come to old growth, I'm on the same boat as the RMLW Council. Again, I've only been here about a year and a half. But we have these discussions also at our referral committee when it comes to people harvesting or logging within Leetwat's territory, not only within the Cheakamus, but also, we deal with our own referrals in Leetwat. And that discussion has always come up on how to protect old growth. What can we do better, or how can we preserve? And it does come back to almost what Jeff has in mentioning all the different aspects of harvesting, or the balancing act, I guess you can call it, and trying to accommodate everybody within all the sectors when it comes to harvesting, whether it's recreation, whether it's the fuel burning, whether it, it goes on and on and on. So for me, when it comes to old growth, I have to admit, I want more education around it. We received a referral, and the logging company was wanting to do some old growth. And my question right away was, well, what's the point of protecting old growth management areas if you're gonna turn around and log it anyway? And so we're having one-on-one sessions with the province, helping me understand protected ogmas, logging ogmas, shuffling ogmas, and we do have a lot of traditional values when it comes to ogmas, for sure, old growth and trees in general, but it's still learning opportunities, learning for me, but a balancing act. So I just wanted to share that. Thanks, Heather.
Thanks, Lucinda. Simon, I think this question could probably go to you. A couple of questions about second growth. What is the age of the second growth forest, and what is the optimal age to harvest second growth? I'm going to combine those two.
Okay, well, in the community forest, the age of our second growth is as young as 10, 15 years, which is very young. Some of the older second growth in the community forest is it's approaching 50 years, maybe 60, typically logged in the 1960s. There is some older second growth, which I would call sort of more mature forest, which is in the southern portion of the community forest in the Brew Creek area. That was not necessarily a product of logging. That was a product of just natural wildfire, or wildfire from when the railway was put through the valley at the turn of the century, or about 100 years ago or so. In the community forest, the average second growth is anywhere from young sort of 15-year-old to 50-year-old, and a large proportion of that is in the sort of 30 to 40-year-old age, and typically dates back to the logging that happened in the 1970s, 1980s, when there was extensive clear cutting that occurred in the places like the Callaghan, Brandywine valleys. Now, those second growth forests are not merchantable at this time. They don't. They are not terribly fast growing sites. They tend to be mid-elevation mountain type forests that are balsam hemlock stands that are not putting on a vast amount of volume. So they are probably going to be looking at a 60 to 80 years before they get to an age where they would be merchantable. So if that answers your question there, I could go on further with that, but I think that's probably about right.
Heather, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted. Okay, somebody has their hand up. So Jared. Let's see if we can unmute Jared. There. Jared, can you hear us?
Yeah, hi there.
And we can hear you.
Okay, great. I forgot I raised my hand, but that's okay. My question was about, I'm wondering if you guys could speak to the monetary differences between protecting old growth forest and versus what, say, those stands that you plan on logging, what their worth might be in their carbon sequestration and storage value, as well as the price on carbon. I'm assuming that it makes more financial sense to log these areas, but I'm wondering at what price per ton of carbon might it not make sense to log these areas anymore?
Could I take that one, Heather?
You sure can.
Hey, very good question, Jared. Nice to meet you. This is Jeff speaking. So currently, our carbon sells for between about $14 and $25 per ton, the offsets, if you want to call it that. And in rough and dirty, and this is very rough and dirty, we say a ton of carbon is also equal to about a cubic meter of logs so that we can compare them economically. And the average market value of our logs currently even from the old growth is probably around, and it varies almost daily, and it depends on whether you have more or less of something good in the stand, somewhere around $90 to $110 per cubic meter of economic activity. Now, only a small amount of that is a profit for the community forest, but it goes into paying the loggers, the truck drivers, the tree planters. So currently we get about 4 times as much economic activity or value out of logging it than we do selling the carbon for it. I believe the price for carbon will be increasing in the future. And as it increases, that closes the gap. But currently there's much more economic activity, much more employment generated by the logging, harvesting, and reforesting of the sites than by selling the carbon. Does that answer your question, Jared?
Yeah, that did. Thanks. That's kind of what I was thinking, maybe around $100 per ton, we might get to that point. I just have a tough time understanding that we're using ecosystem-based management approaches, but we're still logging old growth forests. It just doesn't really quite make sense.
It is a challenge, and we all have our different viewpoints. The only way I look at it is finding that balance. If you go to sustainability, if we're not, I always have this discussion with my colleagues from Whistler. We believe in the 100-mile diet. We should get our vegetables and our beef, and to some degree our whiskey, from Pemberton. We should get our fish from the Pacific Ocean. But for some reason, we want to get our lumber and paper products from Prince George or Indonesia or Chile. So when you look at the definition of sustainability, and there are thousands of them, and nobody can agree on any one of them, I personally look at it as if we can get our lumber and paper and cardboard products from our local forest, in theory, and it's sustainably and well managed, that should be the most sustainable option for supplying those types of materials. People disagree all the time, and I'm used to that. But I look at it in the global sense, unless everybody in Whistler stops wiping their butts tonight, they need toilet paper tomorrow. Where is it going to come from if we don't produce a certain part of our own pulp fiber? It's coming from somewhere else that may have less good management, may have less protection of old growth, may have worse labor rights. I don't know. It could be just coming from Prince George. It could be coming from Chile. It could come from Indonesia. But the trick is trying to agree on a definition of sustainability and then to achieve it. And it is not easy. These discussions have been going on for years, and unfortunately will probably continue. But it's how you view sustainability. It's not doesn't just mean protection. It means managing this human desire for products, if you want to call them, or uses of the forest.
Yeah, certainly.
And still maintaining, like, we have lots of protection. We have grizzly bears, we have mountain goats, we have wolverines. So if we have all of the bits and pieces that should be in a functioning ecosystem in that kind of forest, some people would say, well, you have the ecosystem functioning. Yes, you are taking some of the trees, but we still have we have not degraded it to where it doesn't function or provide the values that it should.
Great.
It's finding that line.
All right. Thanks, Jared and Jeff. We have a number of questions, and I'm going to combine a couple so that hopefully we can get through everything. So we have a couple of questions around in what ways is the community forest ahead of the province in old growth protection and management, and what's to stop? Why wouldn't the community forest stop old growth logging immediately within the community forest? I guess.
Do you want me to try that one again?
Sure. As our chair.
Okay, so as I sort of tried to point out on the map and the little chart in the presentation, which will be on our website, so you can go check the facts yourself. We are ahead of the province. The maximum legally required old growth protection provincially is 19% of each. We call them biogeoclimatic zones. I don't want to give people a lecture on how we classify things, but we'll call them ecosystems. We are at 30% and aiming to get to 40% on the one that has most of the forest harvesting in it, higher on the other two, which have less forest harvesting typically. So we are quite a ways ahead of where the province is. We're ahead of most other zones within the sea to sky forest district or the coast. We're ahead of where the province currently is. As a result of the Old Forest Strategic Review, I don't know, the province is going to move those targets higher. There's no doubt about that in my mind. Where they're going to move them to, I'm not sure, but they're definitely going to move them higher. And with particular focus on what I'll say they call these more rare ecosystems where there just isn't that much that has not been impacted by harvesting or human settlement or, you look at Whistler, we got ski resort, 3 power lines, a railway, a highway, and forest harvesting history. So there's a lot of impact, but we, as of yet, don't have any of the, I'll call it, extremely threatened ecosystem examples that they identified in the report. So one is we are ahead of where the province typically is. We are trying to move further to more protection. Why don't we stop today? Because we have an allowable cut, and it's it is a decision, not a calculation. But when we applied for the forest, we had to commit to harvesting. We did not apply for a community park license. We applied for a community forest license, and the government granted it based on the acceptance of the principles that there would still be trees harvested. There are still loggers, depending on those jobs. There are still sawmills, pulp mills, depending on getting that fiber. So you don't have the freedom to just cut nothing necessarily. You might be able to lobby to get to that point, but currently we don't have it. The two partners, Liwat and Squamish Nation, actually bought, if you want to call them forest licenses, from Interfor at the time, 16 years ago, and then took some of that quota that they bought commercially and added it to the community forest so that the community forest could be bigger. But the idea of that was they would get their economic activity through the harvesting of the community forest to pay back that investment and to provide those jobs. If they had kept that quota in their other license, they would be harvesting it and getting the profit and the jobs from it. So it is a complicated situation. The movement is definitely there, but it's going to take a little bit of time. And I don't know if we will ever get to no harvesting of old growth until, like, in 30 years, we will have lots of ripe second growth. We won't need to harvest it. The question is, how much can we compress that timeline?
Jeff, just to help you along there, you're carrying a lot of the load of the conversation, and thank you for that. But two, especially in the last year and really in the last couple of years, most of the economic activity through the community forest has been either carbon sales or fuel thinning. There's been very little logging going on, and it still is it's not the driving force is to cut. It's really been limited in the last few years. And another thing that's happened in our community in the last year, and we didn't get to celebrate the occasion like we should have, but after years of work between the Squamish and the Liwat and our community, we signed a framework agreement. So the partnership moving forward with other economic activities besides the community forest, we put that framework in place, and we were to sit down with a group of people from the 3 communities and start working on additional ways we can drive economic activity in our community that supports our neighbors, our First Nations neighbors. So I think there is other work going on. There's a lot of conversations in the questions here about why not other work, why not other jobs. That is our goal, and we put the framework agreement in place last year. that hopefully when this pandemic's over, we can get together, our three communities can get together and truly celebrate that occasion, because it was a tremendous amount of work that went into that.
Yes, I believe so, John.
Okay. Thank you. A couple of questions around the wildfire reduction program. I know, what examples do we have that wildfire reduction actually works to minimize damage from forest fires? And are the examples from areas with similar climate, ecology, and topography? And then another question from Sabrina that's quite similar. What body of science are your wildfire hazard reduction treatments based on?
I can take a stab at that, Heather. Now in the community forest, I think, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we really aren't the science specialists behind the science of fuel reduction. We are basically implementing what the experts are recommending we do. And now, do we have an example that the wildfire reduction treatments that we have done actually work? Well, no, we don't, because we haven't had a big enough fire in the Whistler Valley to test our fuel breaks that we have made. But we are putting our faith in the science that we are making an impact, and that, you know, if there was a large wildfire that happened to come up the valley on a hot summer day from the winds that are blowing from the south, that those fuel breaks that we've created are going to give us a leg up and give us an opportunity to extinguish those fires before they get to the community. So we don't have necessarily any concrete evidence that what we've been doing is going to work, but it's the best science that we have to work with. And to answer the other question, what body of science are your wildfire hazard reduction treatments based on? Well, that's a very good question, Sabrina. And the science currently right now is reasonably new. Wildfire hazard reduction treatments like we've been doing have not been going on in Canada, particularly in British Columbia, for very long. It really has been a new thing that we are doing, and most of the research, from what I understand, has occurred in the U.S. and it's been spearheaded by the U.S. Forest Service, and we are taking those recommendations and adapting them to our coastal forests, and assuming and modifying them somewhat to suit the types of forests that we're running into here. So that's in a nutshell what I could say is the science behind it. But as I say, there are experts in the province that we consult with that are the ones that are going to give us the best advice and the best prescriptions on where to focus our efforts and where we should be putting these landscape level fuel breaks to be most effective.
If I could add to that, very quickly, I'm certainly not a certified wildfire fighter, but 40 years in Whistler Blackcomb, having fought several dozen fires, the ski runs are like fire breaks. And I can say this, that I much prefer to fight a fire along a ski trail. And second to that, if I have to go in the forest, I'd much rather fight it within a glade where we've done thinning, as any skier would know. And a lot of our glades have a lot of similarity to the interface fuel reduction projects that we've had. And lastly, fighting a fire inside a tight forest. And I mostly, the one that stands out for me the most is a 26-hectare fire on Crystal Ridge. And I also call it the cheapest trail development we'll ever have. But that had a lot of volatility. And we were fighting in all those three different elements. And so seeing fuel reduction through those types of design was very compelling to me, that it really helps. With that being said, I'm not the scientist. I don't have the deep lens. I'm sure we're going to learn more about how we can better do fuel reduction. And some areas we're probably going to learn that maybe we ought not to. Back to you.
I can add that at the end of last week, I was on a phone call with Dr. Laurie Daniels, who is a researcher from UBC, who is studying this very question in British Columbia. She's already done quite a lot of research in the interior on the efficacy of wildfire treatments. And now she has, in the last year, begun doing research in coastal forests. And she has agreed to do some research specifically on projects that the RMOW has done. And so we are providing information to her this week so that she can do some analysis on the before and afters of the treatments, and then compare it to, you know, what their understanding has become around what is a good project and what are the outcomes that could be expected. So that information will be shared in this later in the spring when she gets the results in. Also, moving on with the questions. There are a couple of questions here from Bob Brett and Christina Swearhan around other community forests, for example, the Fountain Valley Community Forest, that are no longer logging to their annual allowable cut. They are moving to a non-timber focus, and asking why the community forest doesn't challenge the province on that and begin to just harvest for other reasons besides harvesting old growth. Would somebody like to volunteer?
Okay, it's Jeff again. Hi, Bob, if you're listening. So yes, there are a couple of forests that are, I'll say, harvesting nothing or next to nothing. I don't know if they're officially got that as approved yet as a management plan or their ultimate goal. We'll wait to be seen. And again, I just go back to the previous, like, two of the partners put some investment into this community forest. It would be half the size without their investment, but their investment, they were hoping to get a return on through the harvesting. It could be in second growth if we can make that work. I say we've started a process to examine, if you want to call it, accelerating the decline. It's a funny word, accelerating the decline of harvest of old growth and moving more to second growth. But there are a few sort of technical questions we need answered by the analysts first, and we've started that process. Again, it is the difference of opinion in where you find the sustainability line. We already get quite a bit of criticism from the province about harvesting not even to our 21,000 cubic meter AAC. And I don't know whether the Fountain Group has officially put that forward as their plan, or they just are not harvesting. When it becomes an issue is when it comes to renew the actual license. The government process is to assess your performance. And if you're not performing on the harvest, they have the option. I'm not saying they would do it, but they have the option to not renew the license or to reduce the harvest and allocate it to somebody else. So far, we've been successful in arguing we're just still finding our way. Don't force us to harvest the max. And I believe in the earlier part of the community forest, earlier era, the mayor of Whistler, Nancy, at the time, I believe she went and asked the province if we could have our AAC reduced, and the answer was no.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. A question about the carbon project. We are releasing more carbon by cutting down the old forest and also removing a carbon sink, so creating a double negative. Would someone like to comment on that? Is that the case?
Okay, carbon expertise, we know, again, and carbon is one of those things where we rely on several other experts. It is extremely complicated. Our carbon program is based on the, I'll call it the half of the AAC that we do not harvest. We have extra protection. We have extended rotations in our second growth. Yes, cutting down trees releases carbon. Most human activity releases carbon to some degree. So again, it's that finding the balance. What do we need to do that is necessary or is required or is desired versus its impacts. So, and carbon, I'm not sure who asked the question, but maybe they know more. It is extremely complicated. And so we have a whole team of high-priced PhDs that come every 5 years and assess our performance and help us with our carbon offset program. I don't begin to pretend to be an expert in carbon, but yes, we do release carbon when we harvest. All forests are sinks to some degree. There is debate about the real old forests, whether they are, they store a lot of carbon. It's a question whether they're increasing the storage every year or just kind of at neutral. There seems to be debate about that because again, forests, we say forest or old growth forest, there's 1,000 different kinds of forest or old growth forest, and things like carbon release or carbon storage is probably different for every type of forest. And yet we base a lot of our assumptions on science, which is done on a particular stand or is more of a generalization. So yes, we do release carbon in harvesting. We release carbon in everything we do as humans. So it's again, finding the balance without destroying the planet or impairing the ecosystem.
I think it's time for an easy question for you, Jeff. Will trees be replanted?
Pardon me?
Will trees be replanted after harvesting?
Yes. We typically replant, and Simon can correct me because he's actually on the ground looking after it. Everything we harvest is replanted within ideally 1 year. Occasionally it's taken us 1.5 years or 2 years. And we are replanting with native species to the site, not necessarily identical to the trees that were harvested, but the species that are proper for that ecosystem. And typically we're planting Douglas fir, western red cedar, yellow cedar at higher elevation, and maybe we're talking, Simon and I, about a little bit of balsam. So BC forestry is one of those few kinds of forestry, although we have in some places big clear cuts and it's very industrial, we still limit ourselves to native species. And some people would argue it's the sort of organic kind of forestry because we're not using an exotic species. We're not yet using genetically modified trees. We use trees, some of them are from a breeding program. So they have been, the parents have been controlled to produce hopefully trees that grow well, adapt to the ecosystem, but we do not use GMO trees in BC to my knowledge yet. So natural species, native species, put back sort of what we take, maintain the ecosystem species mix on the landscape like it was prior to harvesting.
Okay, we have a question or a comment from Dan Raymond and about NO3 and NO4, the wildfire fuel thinning projects proposed for above the Rainbow and Emerald neighborhoods, that they are low elevation, old growth, a short stroll from homes. Logging here will be problematic. Similar to other wildfire fuel projects we've done, it is close to homes. But Simon, perhaps just want to comment on things that the community forest does to minimize impacts to neighborhoods when it does projects that are close to homes.
Yeah, thanks, Dan, for the question. And yes, that is a huge concern with these two areas that we've got a fuel reduction proposal, is that they're very, very much in people's backyards, literally. And I'm not sure about the old growth part of it. There may be some old trees in there. Those would not certainly be the trees we would be taking. In all of these field treatments we're doing, we are leaving all of the largest trees. And so that's really not an issue with the fuel treatment projects we're doing, but that is one of the biggest stumbling blocks we have with doing these fuel treatments right in and up to these residential neighborhoods, is the disruption that it causes. And but at the same time, Dan, that is probably the place where we need to be focusing these fuel treatments the most, is right at the interface of the neighborhoods, where if there were a fire, that's where you want to be having a fuel break. Or you don't want there to be a really thick forest that's got all sorts of deadwood lying there, because you've got a big value at risk there, which is people's houses and people. So those were areas that were identified by our fuel prescription specialists to be very, very high impact in terms of fire, hazard reduction. And I think the challenge with those two sites is the terrain being rather steep, and what sort of techniques are we going to be using to do the thinning and the extraction of the material, and with the least amount of disruption. And as I said in the presentation, we really haven't tackled that issue yet. We don't quite know how we're going to go about building temporary trails into there, if we will be able to remove any of the trees, when exactly what it's going to do, how it's going to be implemented. And so you're absolutely right. It can be very problematic, but at the same time, I do think that for the residents of any community in British Columbia, they are going to have to put up with a little bit of disruption if they do want to make their neighborhoods a little bit more fireproof.
Heather,
And maybe
go ahead, Arthur, first.
I'll be very quick, and I'm just reiterating that with climate change, our temperatures are increasing significantly in the valley here. Our coastal forests will start to behave more like interior forests, meaning going from a regime of might burn one day to will burn one day. Studying different communities, whether it be the Paradise Fire in California or Fort McMurray, the number one thing that this community needs to do in terms of sustainability is to fire smart itself 100%. We stand to lose so much, and we've had this little lull with weather the last 2 summers. We haven't been smoked out, it's cooled off, but it's going to go the other way again, and we're going to get some very significant reminders soon, and we really need to work more aggressively to being 100% fire smart, and not to be insensitive to this question about aesthetics. I mean, we are about aesthetics too, but I'd rather have a few less trees and a little less woody debris on the ground, and know that we're gonna survive a fire as opposed to lose a significant part of our community. Thanks.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going, Arthur. But in addition to that, as an Alpine resident, we've up behind us a few years ago, they did a lot of fuel thinning, and there was logging trucks coming down Alpine Way. I think that they pulled 10 loads of timber out of there, truckloads. It wasn't a major disruption to the community. As a councillor, I didn't get any negative letters. I don't think the mayor did as well. But it's nice to know that area has been done, because we are Alpine, especially Emerald, heavily forested with all of the homes backing right onto the forest. So it needs to be done. I think the other thing we haven't talked about it as well is the funding for all this. I mean, to get this work done costs money. Sometimes the costs are offset by some market timber coming out of these fuel thinning projects in the neighborhoods. When I was on council in 2011, 2012, there was no fuel thinning work being done in our community. The province finally got a program going again. We participated. We were getting $500,000 a year to help with this fuel thinning work. That's now in the range of, and correct me if I'm wrong, Heather, but I think that's more in the range of 150, and Heather works very hard to get that. But the work needs to continue. So as Jeff said, the balance between getting the work done, finding the funds to do it, and protecting our community, and in some cases involves some timber sales to make this happen. And in the meantime, we're fuel thinning and protecting our community. And I fully agree with Councillor DeJong on the fire smarting. Our own personal homes, if you're lucky to own a home in Whistler, and 21 people on this call are been around this community a long time, they know the work that we have to do around our homes.
Heather, if I just add one thing, agree with John and Simon and Arthur, is I believe it's Dan who asked the question. I believe if we are going to go forward with the actual work in behind in NO2 and NO4, because they are so tight to neighborhoods and houses, that we would host a neighborhood meeting first with information, discuss options and plans. I would hope, well, as the chairman, I could say, I would guarantee for now, that we would not just show up one day, Dan, you wouldn't hear the chainsaws behind your house and not know what's going on, that there would be community, and I would say more specifically neighborhood meetings to talk about it and to talk about options and to discuss how it should turn out and what should happen, be it noise during the activity, be it limitations on walking your dog on the trails during activity, whatever it might be. But there should be a proper, thorough, full disclosure neighborhood meeting first.
Thanks, Jeff. And the other speakers. We have a logistical question, and I think I can answer this one. So why aren't 2021 harvesting plans on the Community Forest Harvesting Plans webpage up to date, specifically about the Sioux and show plans? They're different than what are shown tonight. I would say it's because we were just fixing up this presentation on the fly yesterday, today. The plan that is shown on the Community Forest website was from a presentation to council in mid-February, and we will be updating the website with the presentation that was prepared for tonight's open house. So you will be able to get the information that was shared tonight. Another question from Bob Brett, and I suppose, Jeff, as our chair, this could go to you. Will the Community Forest commit to releasing annual reports, annual reports that include volume, revenue, costs, and person days or years of employment by block? Why hasn't any financial information been released in the past, and what prevents releasing it now?
I would say, with going through the whole list again, most of that we do report to the Community Forest Association, Heather, I believe. Certainly we have no problem with volumes, hectares, blocks, best estimate of human hours or effort, if you're human days of work, and the financials as well, Bob. There's not a lot to report with them, but we are it's a community forest. We report to the community, so there's no reason why that should not be available.
Thank you.
Fair enough. I don't.
Speaking into a, yes, thank you. So we will make sure that information gets onto the website. We are working on the annual report right now, I believe, right, Simon?
Yes, that's right. And just another note on those maps. I mean, there have been a number of maps produced. They just have a different look to them, but they actually have the same shapes on them for where we're proposing to go. They just are they were produced by a different guide, a different person at a different time. So we will be getting everything on the website and trying to make them as legible as we possibly can. Thanks.
Thank you. A question from Melanie Tardif. I guess there's a question I might have in here to start. So it says, what kind of monitoring systems will be implemented in the upcoming refreshing or renewal of the EBM plan? First of all, has the Community Forest, someone speak to the commitment to update the EBM plan? And then if that's the case, how would it be monitored?
Okay, it is due for an update. She's correct. It will end up probably being updated, I would say, in late 2021 or into 2022, after we've done this sort of analysis and got some answers back on these changes that we're thinking about, and if we reduce old growth and harvest some of the second growth earlier. The EBM plan is written to be relatively flexible, or if you want to call it stable, but there are definitely things in it that should be reviewed and either reaffirmed or changed. And that would be, again, a process. We might do the initial work, but there would be meetings, community meetings or open meetings to get input from the community again as to the changes. We're not just going to change it and publish the new EBM plan. Like everything we've done, like with access and with EBM reserves, we go through a process with the community members, the broader community, to seek input into plans before they're changed or modified.
Thank you. A couple of questions from George Shep Alexander and John Wood that are along the same theme, in that what is the harm in halting old growth logging now until we understand better what the repercussions are. Once it's gone, it's gone. Should we not be protecting what is left of the old growth habitat until we are sure we're not doing irreparable damage? Is there anything further that the board would like to say about that?
I would just sort of reiterate the stuff we've already talked about. We have a fair amount that is protected. We have not halted, but we're definitely not doing very much. And I think the last couple of years we've done none. Now, part of that is market forces. Some of it is we internally discuss and debate some of these old growth blocks. So it is part of the forest. Our AAC currently depends on it, and our carbon offset program also depends on some harvesting from old growth, some harvesting from second growth. Those are the questions we're trying to examine different choices or different answers for. But it will take, I'm going to say, a year. Everything takes, you like to say everything takes 2 months. Nothing takes 2 months these days. So if things are going to change, it's just going to take a little bit of time.
Thank you. The next question from Sabrina is, how can local builders purchase this local supply of timber? As far as I'm aware, we export all of our raw logs overseas.
Okay, so we do not export all of our raw logs overseas. We do, in the last few years, have exported, I don't know the exact number in front of me, some, but if people are interested in buying timbers, or I'm not sure if she means logs or timbers, basically we sell through a broker or brokers to the highest, whoever will pay the most. So if people actually want to buy local logs, we have them for sale. The interesting thing is with things like FSC and LEED certification, sometimes you get a higher score bringing a timber up from California than you do getting one out of the Callaghan. It doesn't make environmental sense to me necessarily, but in the way those systems are set up, that's sometimes what happens. There are several outfits in Squamish and the Lower Mainland that do make, I'll call them timbers, for the beautiful timber frame type houses that they build typically in Whistler. And some of that wood is from BC, some of it's from outside BC, and certainly some of it could be from the community forest. Typically, we are harvesting smaller second growth Douglas fir, which goes primarily to plywood plants in the Lower Mainland and makes plywood. And our old growth is typically more hemlock and balsam, which people are not usually using hemlock and balsam for the timbers in framing their homes. But if they're willing, if they want to buy logs, get a hold of Heather and she will get a hold of me and we'll put you in contact with the guy who sells them. But it's an interesting world that people think it's greener to bring a Douglas fir beam from Northern California than to get one from the Callaghan.
Thank you, Jeff. A question here from Kathy Jewett. Doesn't it depend on where the wood is processed regarding the 0 mile theory? Can you speak to where our wood may be processed?
Okay, so the second growth that we've been producing the last couple of years, primarily from the fuel management, the vast majority of it goes to plywood, either rich ply on the Fraser River in the Lower Mainland, or coastland, which is makes laminated veneer lumber in Nanaimo, or it goes out to Leadcore and Chilliwack if it's very sort of small and lower grade, and they make small dimension lumber primarily for the Asian market. Our old growth goes, the pulp stuff goes typically to either Howe Sound pulp mill or the pulp mill in Harmac in Nanaimo. We sell to both. And the rest of the hemlock and balsam, some of it goes domestically to domestic sawmills, but it is primarily on the coast still cut. The lumber is still exported, the logs, and then about, somewhere between 20 to 30% of our logs, our hemball logs, are probably exported as round logs, but it varies. 2 years ago, that was true. This year, there's less export of round logs going on because the dimension of the domestic prices are creeping up. whereas there used to be a very difference between the domestic price and the export price for the same log. Is that clear?
And it answers a question that's further down the list as well. So this is a question that I think we would put to our two Whistler councillors, if they have some background on this. Why did we, I guess the ROW, import wood from Germany to build the bus shelter instead of using our local CCF timber supply?
Can't say I have the intel on that one, Heather.
I don't know.
The fair question. I always feel good when I see the portable mill in our parking lots up here.
You know, it's a good question. And I ask that a lot, is sitting on the WHA as well, because some of our materials are still coming from overseas. In the case of the bus shelter, my understanding was the type of machinery and the type of product that was needed for that, the best price was coming from Germany. They are ahead of us on this kind of engineered timbers and the work. We're catching up dramatically within my family. My daughter is involved in this type of work, and the plant she's involved with in Nelson, BC has just expanded dramatically to take on larger projects like this. So more and more we're seeing word coming out of products coming out of Penticton and Nelson that in the future we won't have to go to Germany for it, for this. When we're doing the passive house building, the windows came from Poland, and at the time they met the highest specs for the best price, because again, they have years of experience ahead of us. Again, we're catching up. Finally, we're catching up with this type of product, and so that's the answer. Is it something we want to do? Absolutely not. Is it something at the time that was the best choice? It was.
Thanks, John and Arthur. Just looking at the time, there's a number of comments here from folks who are still very concerned about the harvesting of old growth. So I think that our team has answered quite a number of questions on that. And so I'd like to get to some of the questions that are on a little bit different themes so that we have a chance to answers from some other folks here. Let's see, John Wood asks, will there be logging in the CRA, meaning the Whistler Blackcomb tenure? What fire break work is being done on the Whistler Blackcomb tenure? Arthur, are you able to speak to that?
Absolutely. Thanks for the question, John. I just very briefly, we're not at build out, but we are, close. I think WB, its master plan, we're well over 80% developed. We actually, interestingly, we had courtesy of the province some funding last summer, and we are doing some light scale fuel reduction around key infrastructure. For example, lift terminals, restaurants, and we're not done. I expect to see more of that work. And we're actually going to, and I'll put this up, I think this is a good venue to mention that, and John, Councillor Grills made a comment about the challenge of cost. So we're going to try to do some very limited burning coming next fall in these fuel reduction areas to try to knock down the cost so we can get the acreage done that we need done. So, sorry, two perspectives to the question. One is absolutely our ski trails, our glading, our road systems. We have a sort of a natural design for fuel suppression, but we're actually doing even more now with respect to the growing risk again. Thankful for the funding of the province coming from last year and going to this year.
Thank you, Arthur. There's a question here regarding it's quite a long question, so I'll try to summarize, about the Sea to Sky LRMP and the areas that it had identified as conservancy. Previously, SO2 and SO4, the proposed logging blocks up at the top end of the 16-mile Sioux Valley were flagged as low profit. If the community forest is interested in protecting ecosystem values, would it be willing to move away from SO2 at SO4? Jeff or Simon, perhaps you could speak to that.
Okay, at this point, I believe those are still, I'll say being looked at in a preliminary stage. I don't know whether there will actually be viable cut blocks worked out there. Again, it comes down to when you move away from somewhere, you are moving to somewhere else. And so in the, whatever, how we define sustainability is we want to go where we get the most benefit with the least negative impact. Just going away from 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, where are we going to is the question that comes up. And that's the challenge of figuring out, if you want to go away from somewhere, where are we going to? If we're going out of the community forest, are we going to harvest more at Squamish, more in Pemberton's community forest, more in Prince George, wherever? I don't know. So at this point, the plans up there are not firm and hard. There may become some, and they will be again put out onto the website and through a process before any actual harvesting occurs. But I can't really say we're going to go away from them without having more information about them.
Okay. John,
I would like to say, Heather, maybe this is the chance. There's an awful lot of interest in the old growth question.
Mhm.
I'm optimistic that in a couple of months, I used to say a few weeks, now I'm thinking after today's announcements, a couple of months, we might crawl out of this COVID hole we're in. It would be very good to have a more face-to-face discussion, review, public meeting about the old growth question. We might have a few more answers in a couple of months. It's hard for me to carry on a good discussion or debate, I think, this digital way. I would rather sit in a room full of people and talk, argue, debate, discuss, whatever you wish to call it. So if people are okay who are on the meeting, most of you are, I'll call it regular contacts and involved in the community forest and have been for years. But when we set up I'll call it an old growth meeting, for lack of a better term, if you're okay with us contacting you based on you having signed on to this meeting, I would say in a few months, hopefully we could get together face to face and have a much better discussion about the issue.
Okay. I would be happy to coordinate that.
If you're not okay with us just using the current list, then you'll have to respond to some kind of ad or something that we'll post about the meeting.
Yeah.
But if we just take this as a contact list and assume everybody's interested, you don't have to come to the meeting. But
We'll find a way to reach out. I'm not sure all the privacy issues around reaching out to people who connected with us tonight, but I will figure that out, and we'll make sure that people have a way to find out when that might happen.
I promise I'm not going to try to sell them insurance or an investment scam.
Okay. So another question from John, asking if he said it would be useful to have our MLA involved in these discussions. Has Jordan Sturdy ever shown an interest, and has he been asked to participate?
Asked to formally participate, I don't think so, but he was definitely, he does sort of, I believe he meets with the forest industry once or twice a year, kind of current issues, and I believe he was quite aware of the Forest Strategic Review guys when they were in town meeting with different people. I don't know if he himself made a presentation, but he's definitely aware of these issues, I would say. We could make a point of inviting him when we have an old growth discussion. Whether he would come or not, I can't control, but there's nothing wrong with inviting him.
Just very quickly, I had a discussion with MLA Sturdy this morning, specific on old growth and voicing the concerns of our community on old growth. So Jordan is definitely interested in the issue and very willing to participate.
Thank you. We have a hand up from Sue Maxwell. Sue, if you press *6 to unmute yourself. There we go. We should be able to hear you. Go ahead, Sue.
Thanks. And sorry that I'm late. I have two questions. The first is, it seems like there's a lot of interest in old growth, and forgive me if this one's been asked, but I was wondering if there had been any thought of protecting all of the old growth by increasing the carbon offset program, and perhaps to make sure that there was still employment for the First Nations partners, look at using some funding from the carbon offsets from that, and perhaps applying for some of the Wild Safe BC funding to create maybe a First Nations Guardian or Ranger program, because I think we need to stop cutting old growth, but it would also be good to, especially with ongoing COVID, help protect the forest by having people who are out there to check on what's going on and help educate people on how to be out in the forest.
Hi, Sue. Good to hear from you again. It's Jeff. Increasing carbon offsets from old growth. Like I say, this is one of the things that we have contacted Brinkman. You might remember Robert Seaton from Brinkman, who kind of is the carbon guru and our forest timber supply analyst, to try and figure out if there is an option to move the carbon program to protecting more old growth and perhaps less emphasis on the second growth. So in that, the answer to your question is we are looking at that question quite seriously. The employment part is more challenging, not impossible, and your ideas are not without merit. I just don't sure if they would work in the long run, but they're certainly, it's not a bad idea. But I say we started talking about this in the board last year, and it's going to take a little while to come up with final answers, if I'll call them that.
Thanks, Jeff. And one other question is about, I know before the community forest worked on developing the access management plan, and I haven't looked in the current plans in detail, but it's my understanding that some loops are getting created. And we have seen in the past that once that happens, it really increases the motorized use of the trails or of the roads. And then that leads to a whole pile of other problems. And increased motorized recreation is not supported by the municipality. So I was just wondering how the community forest is making sure that we are not increasing motorized recreation use.
So Sue, to my knowledge, we haven't created any loops. Some of the commercial rec operators, they seem to build trails, loops, whatever, under their management plan and their permitting process, but we have not. They certainly, some of them have expressed an interest in connecting to our roads, existing or new, but we have not, I don't think to this point, facilitated any loops, because it is, some of them want them, but there's definitely I'll say a strong part of Quack, Aware, Whistler municipality that do not want them, and the First Nations. Again, if they're going to facilitate motorized access into an area that I know the Squamish Nation does not want motorized access, then we have not been doing anything to help. But we cannot stop or prevent a tourism operator from building trails as long as he or she is within their permitting and planning framework.
Great, thanks, Jeff.
Okay, thanks. We're getting down to our last few minutes here. So there's a question from Claire Ruddy. In a presentation to FLAC last year on 2021 harvesting, fee 02 and powder 07 were highlighted as not economically feasible, but they were included tonight in the plans. There has been repeated mention of science-based approach, given the repeated concerns raised from multiple parties around new access roads, habitat fragmentation, loop roads being problematic. Where is our science on road impacts on wildlife coming from?
I can address that partially. The proposal in the Callaghan powder 07, I think it is that you're referring to.
Yeah. Yes, powder 07.
Yeah, powder 07 has been, at least a decade now has been proposed, and it just has not been economically viable because of the road development costs mainly in there. And that is really the reason why we just keep putting it on the plan, but we haven't actually, neither of the two partners, logging partners, have followed through with it. So at this point, we're not prepared to take it off of the plan, and we are just going to stick with it. And it has been re-engineered, which means that it, the boundaries have been changed and the levels of retention have been modified so that it would be more suitable for logging and road building. So that's the economics of logging in a stand like that. And the issue with the road through P07, which is, I think, one of these loop roads that has been suggested. It's generally not the CCF's intention to build loop roads. And I know that really the Ministry of Forests, Lands and Natural Resource Operations don't really like them either, from a wildlife conservation perspective and just impact on the land. So if we did go ahead with P07, as I mentioned in the presentation, the road access would likely come from the south, which is already the existing road, and would not loop in through the north. So that would mean that the community forest would not really be encouraging a loop road, if that answers your question.
Thanks,
Just the
Simon.
one thing, Simon, sorry to add, Claire, if you're still listening, it's Jeff. There's a mine up on that road system, and in the last year, I don't know if it's new owners or whatever, we're not involved, we're not consulted. The miners have put some effort into fixing up the first kilometer or two of the road, which has the result of potentially making our economics better. That may not be good news for somebody who doesn't want to see it logged, but for those who are still looking at doing some logging, the economics change a little bit when somebody else contributes to fixing up the road. And at this point, the old mine there has got a new investor, new owner, I'm not sure, same guys. They were up there last year fixing the road. And we don't plan to build a loop, but we don't have a tool or mechanism to stop the recreation or tourism tenure holder from, when we finish our road, if he or she wants to build a trail off the end of it and tie into something, we don't control that. We can have input, we can suggest we don't like it, but we don't actually get a yes or no at this point.
We're getting into our last minute, and just wanted to quickly answer a couple of questions that John Wood had raised here about deciduous trees as nature's fire break. Perhaps we should be leaving them. Just want to say that yes, in wildfire projects, deciduous trees are left behind, and the community forest has gone in and planted deciduous, backfilling some areas that have been done. So that is definitely part of the plans, and we recognize that deciduous trees are part of, act as part of the fuel break. So that is included in the planning. At this point, I want to just remind everybody that tomorrow there will be a survey posted on whistler.ca/CCF and also on the Cheakamus Community Forest webpage, cheakamuscommunityforest.com, with a survey of questions that you can answer about some of the plans you heard tonight. And I really want to thank everybody for listening in. Really appreciate your input and feedback. And thank you to the board of directors as well for their time tonight. And thank you to my comms team for helping me out getting this organized. Hopefully in the nearest future, we'll be able to meet face-to-face again. And when that does happen, we will definitely be organizing some further meetings, and particularly around the old growth question. So thanks, everybody. Good night, and we'll meet again soon.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Especially to the participants who put their 2 hours into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Stay healthy, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good night.